If asked to pick the quintessential song to represent the counterculture of the 1960s psychedelic era, an anthem of sorts, nothing seems more appropriate than White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane. Somehow they managed to grab hold of the spirit of psychedelia that permeated that space and moment in time and trap it inside the song's haunting, marching melody like a genie in a lamp. One that can be released at will with the simple press of a play button, allowing the spirit to emanate forth alongside disjointed guitar licks which fill the listener with a nostalgia they can't help but to fully embrace and experience, whether they were originally around in that period or not. They enter it through the rabbit hole of White Rabbit. With lyrics that pull fantastical imagery from Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, it's no secret that White Rabbit's underlying theme is based on the experience of taking psychedelic compounds. In fact, when analyzed, the verses document the whole process of first being offered, then ingesting such substances, and then falling down the rabbit hole into a realm of surreal oddities, taking White Rabbit's listeners along for the entire trip. The late 60s saw an explosion of mind expansion in the counterculture from these very substances being experimented with. As the writer of White Rabbit, Grace Slick, stated plainly, in the 60s, the drugs were not the ones like heroin and alcohol that you take to blot out a terrible life, but psychedelics, marijuana, LSD, and shroomies. Psychedelic drugs showed you that there are alternative realities. You open up to things that are unusual and different, and in realizing that there are alternative ways of looking at things, you become more accepting of things around you. For the so-called freaks of the psychedelic movement, these substances acted as keys to unlock portals to other dimensions of consciousness, to open Huxley's doors of perception and break on through to the other side. Afterward, returning back to base reality with paradigm-shifting revelations that sparked a movement of peace and love, the likes of which were never seen before or since in Western culture. This, against the backdrop of the Vietnam War, the summer of 1967 was a pivotal time in history, particularly American history. It was a time of high rebelliousness, high consciousness, and high strangeness. Avant-garde art crept up from the underground into mainstream life, while bright colors, long hair, flowing beads, decorative flowers, and happenings popped up out of the ether all at once as if afforded by Providence, drawing the youth in like a lysergic diethylamide-powered magnet, while simultaneously terrifying the previous generation who couldn't begin to understand what they were witnessing. The times, they had changed. What better metaphor for Grace to use in her documentation of that era than the twisted reality Alice stumbled upon when she fell down the rabbit hole? In these seemingly uncharted territories of illogical surrealism, what better guide could one ask for than Alice, who'd been face to face with the absurd and made it out the other side unscathed? Alice was on her own, Grace would explain in 2021, and she was in a very strange place, but she kept on going and she followed her curiosity. That's the White Rabbit. The 1960s resembled Wonderland for me. Like Alice, I met all kinds of strange characters, but I was comfortable with it. Having said she was comfortable with this strange environment isn't to confuse the fact that it wasn't all roses all the time. There could be scary elements in the realms of the expanded mind as well. Scary people, whose minds were being bent to their limits, and scary settings, where terror lurks both in the background and in front of your eyes. In those singular times, the chemicals got inside you and took you where they would, regardless of your wants. It was up to you to turn off your mind, relax, and float downstream with the current, not against it, and do your best to enjoy the trip, if you could, and learn the lesson that was imparted to you when the journey came to a close. One thing was for sure, though. These weren't the store-bought medications from the cabinet above the sink in your parents' bathroom. One pill makes you larger, Grace sings in explanation, and one pill makes you small. And the ones that Mother gives you don't do anything at all. Go ask Alice when she's 10 feet tall. It's here, in the first bars of the song, that we're confronted with the first Alice in Wonderland analogy, referring to the scene where Alice is instructed by a butterfly, that was just a caterpillar smoking heavily on a hookah pipe before taking flight, that if she eats one side of a mushroom, she'll shrink, while the other side will help her to grow high. At this point in the song, we, the listeners, have just been offered our sacraments to ingest, and our journey down the rabbit hole has only just begun. And if you go chasing rabbits, Grace continues in reference to following these peculiar chemical curiosities, and you know you're going to fall, as in fall down the rabbit hole into realms of high strangeness, tell him a hookah-smoking caterpillar has given you the call. Call Alice when she was just small. Again, we're told to refer to Alice, who's traversed this terrain before. From Alice in Wonderland, Grace then moves us over to Through the Looking Glass, the story where Alice returns to another wonderland of bizarre scenes and characters. A land set up like a chessboard where Alice must make it to the other side to escape, the whole while overcoming peculiar encounters with the strange personas she runs into, some good, some not so much. Just as Grace and her peers were encountering and doing their best to navigate through in the labyrinth of 1960s psychedelia. And then back to Wonderland we go, just after Alice has eaten a magic mushroom. At this point in our journey, we've fallen out of the bottom of the rabbit hole and are in the midst of our trip, surrounded by high strangeness in every direction for the first time. When the men on the chessboard get up and tell you where to go, Grace then sings, and you've just had some kind of mushroom and your mind is moving low, go ask Alice. I think she'll know. We're now fully submerged in the thick of our trip, and our journey nears its peak. From here on out, making sense of our surroundings will be a task most likely not worth attempting, because here, all that exists are absurdities. Grace explains this to us over the elevated music, which is fervently reaching its crescendo by singing, "When logic and proportion have fallen sloppy dead, and the white knight is talking backwards, and the red queen's off with her head, remember what the dormouse said, feed your head, feed your head." These are clearly images and situations seen in a bad trip. But, as psychonauts will attest, even bad trips carry with them valuable and necessary lessons that aren't to be ignored, hence the dormouse instructing us to pay close attention. That line in the song, "Feed Your Head," is both about reading and psychedelics, Grace explained in a recent Guardian article. I was talking about feeding your head by paying attention. Read some books, she then suggested. Pay attention. With that line, "Feed Your Head," the visceral masterpiece known as White Rabbit reaches its end, accompanied by a heavy burst of one last chord struck in unison on every instrument. And as it fades, our psychedelic trip comes to a close. The nostalgic spirit which possessed us slowly slips back into its lamp to sleep until the next time the play button is pressed. In the 1980s, Grace spoke on White Rabbit in an interview, putting forth the theory that books like Alice in Wonderland were coded writings that ushered in the drug culture that the youth of her time would grow to take part in. White Rabbit was letting my parents and everybody's parents know that they had been reading us books written by British authors. The British had control of the Far East, and had found new drugs, which the writers took and then wrote about. Alice in Wonderland, sitting on a psychedelic mushroom. There is a worm who is going to turn into a butterfly that hands her a piece of this mushroom and she gets literally high. She grows. The parents were down on us for taking drugs, so I was just saying, look, you've been reading us drug books forever. Peter Pan, he sprinkled white dust all over everybody. So all of these British writers mainly, because these things hadn't come to America yet, were talking about how your life will be better if you take a chemical. I don't think most people realize the song was aimed at parents who drank and told their kids not to do drugs, Grace would state years later. Grace also told the magazine Q the same sentiment, saying, "Our parents would read us all these stories where you'd take some kind of chemical and have a great adventure. Alice in Wonderland is blatant. She gets literally high, too big for the room, while a caterpillar sits on a psychedelic mushroom smoking opium. In The Wizard of Oz, they land in a field of opium poppies, Wake up and see this emerald city. Peter Pan? Sprinkle some white dust, cocaine, on your head and you can fly. It's nothing short of artistic genius for Grace to have used the exact same allegorically veiling technique as those very authors, through the exact same characters they invented, to push the subliminal drug messaging in White Rabbit, thus proving her theory with undeniable resonance. However, this all being said, it may go even deeper. White Rabbit may have another meaning hidden even further underneath that veil. Some theorize the underlying message is a socio-political commentary on the Vietnam War, the chess theme being an analogy for the battle itself, the men on the chessboard telling you where to go being analogous to the generals ordering around their soldiers, the hookah-smoking caterpillar giving you the call being a reference to the draft that was happening at the time, where the government was giving the call to the terrified young people to serve overseas in a strange land where nothing made any sense. Grace has never explicitly said this is the case, but interestingly did say in more recent times that the song is a little dark. It's not saying everything's going to be wonderful. The Red Queen is shouting, "Off with her head," and the White Knight is talking backwards. Lewis Carroll was looking at how things are run and the people who rule us. Perhaps, once again, Grace was using Carroll's characters in her own verses in relation to leaders in her time. If anything, it's food for thought. One thing is for sure, we'd love to hear what you think White Rabbit is about and what you think about White Rabbit in the comments section below. But before you do, first enjoy this bonus of 5 additional facts about Jefferson Airplane's White Rabbit. 1. Grace Slick wrote the song before joining Jefferson Airplane on a piano missing several keys. I wrote White Rabbit on a red upright piano that cost me about $50, she told The Guardian. It had 8 or 10 keys missing, but that was okay, because I could hear in my head the notes that weren't there. 2. A cultural phenomenon, White Rabbit has been used in countless movies and television shows, including Platoon, The Sopranos, and Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. 3. Released in June of 1967, White Rabbit was considered the anthem of the legendary Summer of Love, coming right out of its central hub, San Francisco, California. 4. Unsurprisingly, the original idea for White Rabbit came to Grace while she was high on acid. During the trip, she was listening to Miles Davis's Sketches of Spain album on repeat, hence the Spanish feel to the rhythm of the track. 5. The song is structured intentionally to build to a climax, starting off with a single instrument, the bass, and slowly adding more and more instruments as it marches on, until finally, an explosion of sound hits its peak at the finale. Grace Slick would say, "I heard Ravel's Bolero on the radio and it surprised the hell out of me. I love Spanish music, and I'm inspired by things irrespective of how popular they are. Bolero starts off with a couple of instruments and then more are added. It feels like how an orgasm is built. My song is also built in that same way." Thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed yourself. Feel free to leave a comment below, and don't forget to hit that like button. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button to be the first to know of new releases from the Lyristoric channel. Until next time.